When a serious crime is committed and the police need all the help they can get, there's one group of people they turn to time after time.
Expert witnesses are the golden thread that runs through cases that every single conviction needs.
An extraordinary army of men and women with the expertise to reveal the hidden clues criminals have left behind.
There are so many important pieces of evidence: paint evidence, glass, fibre evidence.
They search harder and look deeper using the very latest techniques.
If I can work out how old those insects are, that's going to give me the minimum time since death.
This is the inside story of how science helped solve some of the UK's most complex cases.
It really was becoming the last throw of the dice.
Nothing's going to bring her back, but she'd had the justice that she rightly deserved.
This is the story of the expert witness. In this episode, we reveal how the tenacity of a team of forensic scientists helped finally catch the killer of 2 children in Brighton.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can now go to my grave knowing that we have justice for my little girl.
And on moorland near Bradford, expert analysis of human remains reveals details of how one couple planned and carried out a brutal murder.
At first, the police thought the bones were animal bones until an expert witness was able to identify that these were in fact human remains.
There are so many important pieces of evidence that all play their part. We should consider them as a kind of a product rather than a sum, so one piece doesn't add to the next, it actually multiplies.
Brighton, 1986. 2 9-year-old girls, Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, have disappeared. Expert witness Roy Green was working at a forensics lab as a junior scientist. 25 years later, he would be the man who helped solve the case.
It was on the news and it's very, quite high profile. But actually, the victims lived in the same part of Brighton that I used to live when I was a student. I've had thousands of cases over my career as a forensic scientist. But every now and again, one will come along that really has quite a personal effect, a personal resonance with me.
The case became known as Babes in the Wood, after the woodland at Wild Park where the girls' bodies were discovered. For journalist Chris Summers, it was one of the most harrowing cases he has ever covered.
This is Wild Park, which is obviously quite a large area. It's, a really attractive place for a kid who lives at Molscombe, just on the other side of the road, but it is a very busy main road, and Karen and Nicola were specifically not allowed to come here to play. Their parents would prefer them to play, within sight of the house. The case was, a case of 2 little girls who went out to play after school or in the evening, and they just never came home.
Nicola's father, Barry, will never forget the moment he found out the girls were missing.
She was very, very prompt with Thursday nights. I said, they'll be home in a minute. You've got EastEnders, you've got Top of the Pops. They're not going to miss them, are they? And then, come to 8 o'clock, got a bit worried then. I said, we better phone the police, This is more serious than we think.
When the girls were reported missing, the police immediately organised a massive search and involved volunteers from the local community.
For 24 hours or so, the 2 little girls were missing. It was a huge manhunt. They were looking in houses and back gardens and eventually in Wild Park as well.
The following day, the girls were found.
Police in Brighton have discovered the bodies of 2 small girls who disappeared yesterday evening.
I'll remember it forever now. There's 3 policemen come in, and the little man in the middle said, "I'm afraid to say that Nicola's been found and she's dead." Why? Why then? Who?
Detectives were already suspicious of one man, Russell Bishop. He was a local who had helped with the search, but displayed some unusual behaviour.
Wild Park, it's an enormous area. They could be anywhere here. Russell Bishop happened to run in the direction of where the bodies were found. And obviously, that was more than curious to the police.
Various witness statements put Bishop near the scene of the crime. And there was further evidence. A blue sweatshirt found on a path between the park and Moulscombe railway station.
The sweatshirt was a blue, quite grubby, paint smears on it, and it was handed in. And then it became more important because it got identified as possibly coming from Russell Bishop.
Investigators found blue fibres matching the sweatshirt at the scene of the crime. Bishop was tried for murder, but pleaded not guilty. He claimed the sweatshirt was not his, and there was little forensic evidence to prove otherwise.
This was the mid-80s. DNA was in its infancy, so the evidence against him was, fairly circumstantial. It was inferences about, where he'd been and what he'd said to people. But very crucial to that, there was a lot of questions about that time of death.
The girls had been seen alive up until 6:30 p.m. An eyewitness also claimed to have seen Bishop leaving the park at that time.
The time of death is crucial. If the defence could prove that, he was seen somewhere else at the time that the girls are believed to have died, then, he couldn't be guilty.
And so the judge directed, if the jury felt that the girls were alive at a certain time, then they must acquit. So it really didn't matter what evidence was there forensically, they didn't get a chance to consider it.
The police's case collapsed after that. I said, "This ain't looking good, mate. I'm starting to believe that you're not going to find this man guilty. I don't think you're pushing it enough." And as the consequence is that he was found not guilty.
The case remained unsolved, but 3 years later, Bishop was under investigation again, this time for an attack on a young girl. She was left for dead, but survived. Evidence found by Roy Green helped secure a conviction.
We found DNA on an item he'd thrown away that matched Bishop and matched the victim. And so that helped to provide the evidence which convicted him.
There was a lot of similarities, but you can't convict people just on, a crime being similar. You had to have something more than that.
In 2003, changes to the law allowed some cases to be retried. So, police once again attempted to prosecute Bishop for the murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. But their evidence was considered insufficient for a retrial. Then in 2011, advances in forensic science gave detectives new hope, and they reopened the case, but it wouldn't be easy.
With this case, Bishop had already been acquitted. If the case has been tried before at court, you're in what's called a double jeopardy, which means that you have to have new and compelling evidence. All your ducks have to be in a row before you can go, because you only get one shot.
Roy began with a new examination of the sweatshirt. He found DNA on the cuff and matched it to Bishop. But 25 years of investigation had created a problem.
An important part of the process is checking the reliability of it. And another of my colleagues was specifically tasked with doing this for every item. And it was her view that because of the processes that had carried on and the way in which the item had been handled and treated and passed about and examined with other things previously, that you couldn't necessarily say that the piece of DNA that we got there because it was part of the crime rather than being transferred by some other method.
But Roy was not about to give up. Instead, he began a search for new fibre evidence.
This is a comparator. And basically you've got two microscopes that are identical. And what that allows you to do is get two fibres that you think might match alongside each other, and then you can compare them, seeing them both at the same time, and then you can apply different lighting to them. So we would apply white light, blue light and UV light and compare them and see if they match under all circumstances.
Roy hoped to use fibre analysis to prove that Russell Bishop did indeed own the controversial blue sweatshirt by linking it to other items in his possession.
We found that there were blue acrylics which could have come from the sweatshirt on his trousers, and there were patchy peach acrylic fibres found on the sweatshirt which were present on a pair of socks at his house. There were links to items that we know Bishop had worn, but also to this item that he says he hasn't worn or doesn't know anything about. It's not his, and yet there were fibres there that linked him to it.
Roy had found the first ever evidence to show Russell Bishop did own the sweatshirt. He now looked for more fibre evidence to link the garment to the bodies of the two girls.
So we've got pink polyesters from Nicola's jumper found on the sweatshirt, and we've got blue acrylics from the sweatshirt found on the jumper.
In forensics, the more fibre links you can find, the better. It's painstaking work, and it can't be rushed.
When you look at fibre evidence, you say, OK, so there's fibres on this item that match that item. How could that happen? Well, either the two items have been in contact, or this person's come into contact with another source of those fibres that just happen to be the same. The more links you have, and if you have cross links going both ways, the stronger the evidence becomes, because it multiplies the number of coincidences until they become, so many that they test credibility.
Roy continued to study the sweatshirt and began an analysis of paint stains on the sleeve.
Flakes of matching that paint were found on the tapings of Karen Hadaway's clothes. And so it became clear, really, that whoever had murdered the girls had worn the sweatshirt.
Roy was building a new and compelling forensic case against Russell Bishop. Meanwhile, detectives uncovered a new lead themselves. 25 years earlier, one key witness said they saw Bishop leave the park while the girls were still alive. But now, a new witness had come forward.
There was a crucial witness that they discovered in their new inquiry who remembered seeing Bishop going back into the park. It suggested that the timeline at the first trial may have been all wrong, and that could prove, and did prove, absolutely vital.
Detectives now had evidence Bishop was in the park at the time of the girls' death. They had fibre evidence linking the sweatshirt to the bodies and proof that the sweatshirt belonged to him. But thanks to modern science, Roy had one more damning piece of evidence to offer.
During the post-mortem, the pathologist took tapings of exposed skin areas from the girls. We found some cellular material, and we cut that out and submitted it for DNA profiling. And when the results came back, they showed that Karen Hadaway's DNA was there, but it was also DNA from someone else.
Detectives ran the sample through the national database and found a match. Russell Bishop. In 2018, 32 years after Karen and Nicola had been murdered, he was back in the dock. It took Roy Green 3 days to deliver all his evidence.
There was never an eyewitness or a smoking gun. It was all forensic evidence, which together made it clear to the jury that Bishop was guilty.
There was paint, there was fibres, there was hairs. But not only that, But we had DNA evidence, and that was extremely strong.
Russell Bishop was at last found guilty of the double murder of Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway. He was sentenced to life in prison.
This is a memorial that's been constructed quite recently, maybe 200 yards from the main road. It's really heartbreaking how close they were to their, sanctuary of their homes. You can imagine for the parents how awful it was. It's been so many years before they actually got the right man. There was always that doubt until the final moment.
It is satisfying to be able to kind of know that you've played a part in helping to solve a case. And that's always good because it provides closure for victims' families, and that's really why I'm in it.
Roy Green knew what he was talking about. The evidence was irrefutable. I can't thank the man enough. What a clever man. Him and all the people around him. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can now go to my grave knowing that we have justice for my little girl. And it's justice that is well deserved.
Skeletal remains, they can survive for thousands of years potentially, so the manner in which a body is disposed of, concealed, buried, will leave traces of evidence on the skeleton which can be used to interpret what's happened to the body after death.
March 1997. Oxenhope Moor, North Yorkshire. Bones are found in a lay-by. Criminal psychologist Ruth Tully followed the case with interest.
At first, the police thought the bones were animal bones until an expert witness was able to identify that these were in fact human remains. Tragic, tragic case. I often work with people with serious violence convictions and also appear in the court as an expert witness. And what's really interesting about this case is that the way events transpired, a murderer was left on the streets for up to a decade.
Detectives had the bones, but little else to go on. Roy Lambert is a major crimes detective and knows well the challenge of cases like this one.
Scenes where bones are found and nothing much else, they can be very, very difficult to try and identify. As an investigator, you need a starting point. If you can't identify who they are, where do you go looking?
Detectives had a silent witness. Now they needed to reveal its story. Was it someone who died on the moor from natural causes, or something more sinister? They turned to expert witness and forensic osteologist Martin Everson.
The principal role of forensic osteology is to provide a profile of the individual from the skeleton. The less material you have and the more damaged it is, the less you can say and the less precision with which you can say it. You just have to make do with what you have.
Martin began by assessing the extent of the bones that had been recovered.
So in this case, we'd evidently got a partial skeleton. It was incomplete. The skull and mandible, jaw, were missing. The upper limbs were missing. The lower limbs were missing below the mid-shaft of the femur, or thigh bones, of both the left and right side. So these were the remains of a torso.
As Martin studied the remains more closely, he uncovered a first clue.
The value of the pelvis in estimating or assigning the sex is enormous because of the key biological difference between men and women, which is that women give birth and hence they require a relatively open birth canal. And in this instance, the pelvis was clearly that of a robustly built adult male.
Martin was also able to reveal to detectives an indication of when this man died.
There was a little bit of dry, soft tissue left on some of the bones, but typically this partial skeleton was very clean, suggesting that it was some time since death, at least months probably.
But as his forensic analysis continued, Martin discovered shocking evidence of a dark end to the man's life.
There were signs that the femurs, the thigh bones, had been chopped through. There were also signs of burning on the bones. So that suggested to me that an attempt had been made to burn the torso. The remaining evidence on the skeleton was indicative of an attempt to dispose of the body by dismemberment and burning.
It was now clear to detectives that they were dealing with murder.
Cases like this highlight just how important evidence is for effective investigation. If the police didn't know what had happened to the body, they'd have much fewer clues to go on and perhaps not even have an accurate timeline of what had happened.
Martin concluded the body had been left on the moor months earlier. Police now knew when the crime had taken place, but still had no idea who the victim was. And in 1996, science could not yet identify DNA from the badly burnt bones. The case ran cold for nearly a decade.
It's one thing the police having a body, but identifying the body is a different matter. That breakthrough didn't come until 8 long years later in 2004, when DNA techniques had developed further. These breakthroughs in DNA and technologies are essential for effective investigation.
Scientists were now able to identify DNA from the tiniest of traces, and when they took samples from the bones this time, they detected a profile. A comparison with the police database confirmed the skeleton was that of 49-year-old Lenny Fulber.
Lenny Fulber was a Tyneside man, known locally as a wheeler dealer, and he had many children. Some reports say up to 32, some say up to 50, but clearly he had a big family.
Lenny Fulber had a substantial rap sheet, with convictions for dishonesty, violence and indecency.
With regards to victims' background, really, as a police investigator, it doesn't matter. We should treat everybody as equal and do our utmost to find out who's responsible.
The identification gave the case a brand new line of inquiry. Fulber had been released from prison in 1996, just months before the body was found. Police began to investigate Fulber's previous relationships.
Investigations led to Lenny's former partner, Tracy Cameron, and her new partner, Graham Haylett. Lenny and Tracy had children, but when Lenny was remanded into custody in 1996, she started an affair with Graham.
Investigators found out from Fulber's family that on his release from prison, he had made arrangements to meet Tracy in Bradford.
It's reported that Tracy asked Lenny to meet her on the pretense of discussing access to their shared children.
No one had any contact with Lenny after this meeting. Police grew increasingly suspicious.
If you're fortunate enough to identify the owner of these bones, it really opens up the investigation. In the case of Lenny Fulber, it then gave the investigators the opportunity to look back at his movements, his history. They found he'd gone missing. They looked at his associations with his partner and the fact that partner had got another boyfriend now, and then the case started to unravel.
Detectives discovered letters between Tracy Cameron and her new partner Graham Haylett. These made clear their anger at Fulber for his past crimes, Tracy's fear for the safety of her children, and a plot by the pair to murder Fulber. Evidence from expert witness Martin Everson revealed how they disposed of the body.
So we found classic features of dismemberment. This type of analysis really is about trying to understand the circumstances or means of deposition and disposal. So we found 7 skeletal elements that showed evidence of cut marks, and these were very distinctive. So there were V-shaped cut marks, which is typically caused by a sharp bladed instrument such as a knife, and also several indicators that a saw was used.
In 2006, Tracy Cameron and Graham Haylett were tried for murder. The letters they exchanged showed their actions were premeditated. Martin's forensic evidence revealed the lengths they took to cover up their crime and to hide the victim's identity for 8 years.
A good witness, they must be good in the witness box and talk in a language that the jury understands and be convincing. Because it's no point in spending thousands and thousands of pounds on an expert witness if they can't deliver the evidence in the witness box. It's really important that they present the evidence in an understandable way to the jury, but in the witness box, they've got to come across in layman's language and convince the jury that their evidence is strong and believable.
I think in this case, osteological analysis was a unique component. This was a deliberate attempt to dismember and dispose of the body. It would have required a degree of planning and shows that an attempt was made to conceal the crime. Not dimensions of a person's behaviour that can be associated with some kind of psychopathology.
Martin's evidence convinced the jury that the murder of Lenny Fulber was a cold and calculated act. The pair were found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 20 years.
It's reported that Tracy and Graham killed Lenny after they found out that he'd been in prison for child sexual offences. So on one hand, this could have been a vigilante-style attack, but on the other hand, this could have been a misguided way that Tracy thought that she was protecting her own children from their father. If it wasn't for the work of the expert witness, we'd never have known how the bones were attempted to be disposed of. And on top of that, if it wasn't for the hard work of the police, we'd never have known who attempted to dispose of them.